This is family and invited guests only, ma'am. I've got the list right here, and you're not on it. This day belongs to a real Marine and the people who actually knew him. Turn around." The words carried across the reception hall the way a dropped tray carries. Heads turned. Conversation thinned. Staff Sergeant Wade Brantley stood in the doorway with a clipboard pressed to his chest like a breastplate, and he liked the quiet he had made. He was 30 years old, and he had never once been the most important person in a room. And for one afternoon, the doorway had given him that. He intended to keep it. It was a decent room for grief. Someone had set out folding tables with white cloths, and a coffee urn, and a sheet cake nobody would eat. On the far wall hung a photograph of Corporal Miles Ashford, blown up large, grinning at a camera in some better year, and beneath it, a table draped in black with a folded flag and a pair of dress gloves, and the small, terrible arithmetic of a life measured out in framed pictures. Marines in their service uniforms stood in low clusters and spoke in the hushed register menus when they are afraid that speaking normally would be a kind of betrayal. Rain from the morning still beaded the windows. The light through them was the color of pewter. Into that came a woman in a dark coat, and a staff sergeant who had decided she did not belong. The woman in front of him did not move. She wore a plain dark wool coat, buttoned to the throat, and nothing else that spoke. No badge, no lanyard, no pin on the lapel. Her hair was pulled back plain. She might have been 50. She might have been 40. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and looked at him with impatience that had no bottom to it. And she said 4 words. "I knew him." Everybody knew him. Brantley almost smiled. "I've had 3 of you today. Grief tourists. People who read the name in the paper and want to stand near something that matters." He tapped the clipboard. "Give me a name. I'll check the list. If it's on here, you walk in. If it's not, you walk out. That's the whole deal." Vance. He ran a finger down the page. He did not run it far. 2 seconds, maybe 3, and then the finger stopped, and the page turned, and he shook his head with the small pleasure of a man confirming what he already wanted to be true. "Not here." He raised his voice half a step, enough for the sign-in table to hear. "Casey, mark her off. She's leaving." At the table, a young Marine looked up. Lance Corporal, 1 stripe, 20 years old with a haircut 2 days fresh. He did not reach for the pen. He looked at the woman, and then at Brantley, and something in his face was already uneasy, though he could not have said why. "Staff Sergeant," the young Marine started. "Maybe we could just—" "Did I ask you, Lund?" Brantley did not look at him. "Mark her off." Across the hall, near a table draped in black, a sergeant major stood with a folded flag in his arms and watched the doorway. He was a big man gone gray at the temples, and he had been to more of these than he could count, and he had learned to read a room before it read itself. He was reading it now. He had watched the woman come in. He had watched her not flinch. In 30 years, he had learned that the ones who did not flinch were rarely the ones you needed to worry about, and always the ones you needed to watch. Brantley snapped 2 fingers. "Reyes, Lund, walk her out." The second Marine came off the wall. Lund rose from the table slower, unhappy. But an order was an order, and he was 20. The 2 of them flanked the woman in the coat the way you flank a threat, and the room held its breath waiting for the ugliness of it. There was none. She turned before a hand ever touched her. She turned on her own, unhurried, and walked toward the doors, and she gave the 2 young Marines the mercy of never having to lay a hand on her at all. She had carried heavier things than an insult out of worse rooms than this. She let them think it was easy. Lund kept pace at her shoulder without touching her, and at the door, He reached past her and pushed it open, and he said, so quietly that only she could hear it, "I'm sorry, ma'am." She looked at him for half a second. She did not answer. But she filed the face, the way she filed everything, and something in the set of her mouth softened by a fraction of a degree that no one in that room would have caught. The doors sighed shut behind her. The reception hall exhaled and went back to its low grief. Brantley set his shoulders and surveyed his doorway, satisfied. He had handled it. That was the word he used in his own head. Handled. He filed away the small, clean pleasure of it and went back to his list, and he did not think about her again for the better part of an hour, which was the last hour of his career in which he would have the luxury of not thinking about her. Outside, the cold came off the parking lot in a flat sheet. February wind, gray light, rows of parked cars beaded with old rain. The woman walked 10 paces out among them and stopped. And there, alone, with no one she needed to perform for, she settled. Heels together. Weight even. Hands folding to the small of her back, right over left, thumbs tucked. Chin level. Shoulders down and square. She came into a parade rest so exact it looked poured from a mold, a stillness that did not fidget and did not shift and did not need anything from the world in front of it. Wind pushed her coat against her legs. She did not adjust it. Inside, at the glass door, the sergeant major stopped mid-step. He stood with a dead Marine's flag in his arms and stared through the smudged pane at a woman a staff sergeant had just called a grief tourist, and he watched her stand in an empty parking lot the way he had only ever seen people stand over graves, like she had stood over 1,000 of them, and knew the exact cost of everyone, and would stand over 1,000 more. The sergeant major found a reason to go outside. He filled a paper cup at the coffee urn, took a second, and pushed through the glass door into the cold with one in each hand. His name tape read, Boone. He had 29 years in the Marine Corps, and he had learned that the fastest way to find out who a person was to hand them something and watch what they did with it. "Cold day for it," he said, and held out a cup. They usually are. She took it. 2 words back. No more than the moment required. He let the silence sit. Most people could not. Most people filled a silence with their whole life story, their connection to the deceased, their pedigree, their complaint. She drank the coffee and watched the tree line pass the cars and said nothing, and the nothing told him more than a paragraph would have. Silence is a test most people fail, without knowing it was a test. She passed it the way you pass something you have passed 1,000 times, without noticing there had been a question. "You knew Ashford," he said. "I did." "How?" She turned the cup a quarter turn in her hands. "Long time ago. Different country. A beat. He was younger. So was I." Boone glanced down at the flag folded over his own forearm, the 13 folds, the blue field, and the white stars. When he looked up, she was looking at it too, and something crossed her face. Not a stranger's polite sympathy, but the specific, private grief of a person who had done this with their own hands. "Folds short," she said. He frowned, looked down, counted, the way you count something you have counted 10,000 times and never expect to be wrong about. 12, she said. "You've got 12. It wants 13. He counted again. She was right. Somewhere in the handoff a fold had slipped, and no one had caught it. And this woman had caught it across 4 feet of cold air without reaching for the thing. Boone had folded that flag more times than he could number. He had taught young Marines to fold it. And he stood in a parking lot and understood that the civilian grief tourist in the dark coat had folded it more times than he had. "They said the aircraft went down on recovery," he said. "A test." He watched her face. "CH-53. Hydraulic failure on the lift, not the flight." She said it flat, exact, the way you say a thing you have already read the report on. He was on the ground crew, wasn't even supposed to be under it. A pause. He never could stand back and watch other people do the hard part. Boone's throat worked. That was true. That was exactly, precisely true. And it was not in any newspaper. He had read the mishap report himself, twice. The way a senior enlisted man reads the paperwork on a Marine he is about to bury. And the detail about Ashford being under a bird he was never tasked to be under was 3 lines deep in a document nobody outside the command had seen. A grief tourist did not know that. A woman who had read the paper and wanted to stand near something that mattered did not know that. "You've done this before," Boone said. It was not quite a question. "Folded a lot of flags." She said it without weight, the way a person says a thing that has a great deal of weight and has learned to carry it without showing the strain. "Handed a lot of them across. It doesn't get lighter. People tell you it does. It doesn't." Boone had said that exact thing to young Marines. It gets easier. He had known it for a lie when he said it. He had the odd sensation, standing in the cold, of being on the receiving end of his own hard truth from a stranger in a coat. Behind the glass, Brantley watched the 2 of them through the door and read it the only way his afternoon allowed him to read it. The sergeant major was being worked. The grifter had gotten to him. He crossed to the sign-in table and told Lund, low and hard, that the woman was a problem, that she was to stay off the property, that some people would attach themselves to anything with a flag on it. Lund said nothing. Lund was thinking about the way she had looked at him when he said he was sorry, the way something had softened in her face instead of hardening, and he was thinking that grifters did not, in his limited but sincere experience, forgive people that easily. Boone came back inside a few minutes later, holding a coffee he had not drunk. For the first time in 29 years, he was not certain the most senior person at this funeral was wearing a uniform. Brantley made it a story, and a story is a thing other people can join. 2 gunnery sergeants arrived to pay respects, and Brantley met them at the table with it already loaded. A woman had tried to crash the wake, walked right up like she owned the place. No name, no credentials, a whole act about knowing the corporal. He shook his head. They shook theirs. It became, in 90 seconds, a shared thing, a small, warm fire of contempt that 3 men could stand around. Walked right up like she owned the place, Brantley said again, because it had landed the first time. Some people will attach themselves to anything with a flag on it. Sad, really. The gunnery sergeants laughed the short laugh men laughed to agree, and the lie put on weight. Out in the lot, the woman had not left. She had turned the memorial card over, the little folded card with Ashford's photograph and his dates, and she was writing on the back of it in small, level handwriting. Not names to accuse. Times. The honors details composition, the sequence of what was coming. She wrote standing up, spine straight. The card braced against her palm, and she wrote, the way a person writes who has learned that memory is the first thing grief steals and the last thing anyone returns. She was not building a case. That would have been beneath the day and beneath her. She was doing the only thing she knew how to do with a wrong she had decided not to answer. She was recording it, quietly, so that if the truth ever needed to be told, it could be told in order, in fact, without heat. She had learned a long time ago that the loudest people in any room were almost never the ones who decided how it ended. The ones who decided were usually the ones writing something down in the corner and saying nothing at all. Lund came out with a folding chair. He had taken it from the vestibule stack without being told to, and he carried it across the parking lot with the awkwardness of a young man doing a decent thing he could not fully explain, and he set it up beside her in the wind. In case you're going to be out here a while, ma'am. Appreciate it, Lance Corporal. He blinked. He had not told her his rank. She had read it off his collar in the half-second he came through the door, one stripe, and filed it. The way she filed everything. And she gave it back to him as courtesy. He stood there a moment longer than he needed to, and his hands were not quite steady, and he could not have told you why a woman his own detail had thrown into the cold made him feel like the one who ought to apologize. "Go on back in," she said, not unkind. "Before he writes you up, too." He's not usually like this, ma'am." Lund looked back at the doors, then at her, caught between two loyalties he did not yet know how to weigh. "The door thing. He gets a list, and he gets—" He stopped, because he did not have the word, and because whatever the word was, it was not one a lance corporal said about a staff sergeant out loud. "I know exactly what he gets," she said. "I've met 100 of him. He'll be fine. It's the good ones who have the hard afternoons." She nodded toward the building. "Go on." Lund went. But he went slow, and at the doors he looked back once more, and she was already facing away, already back into that stillness, already standing in the cold, like the cold was just weather and not an insult, and he carried the picture of it inside with him and could not put it down. If it turns your stomach that the one person who bled for this Marine is the only one standing in the cold, stay with this one. Subscribe to Honor Tales. You are going to want to see who walks through that door next. The wind picked up. The woman sat in the chair a lance corporal had carried out to her and folded her hands and waited, because waiting was a thing she was very, very good at, and the afternoon was not finished with any of them. Brantley moved it from the room to the record, because a record is a wall a man can hide behind. He opened the reception security notebook, the green log the access detail kept, and he wrote her into it. Unidentified female. No credentials. Attempted access to a restricted memorial. Escorted from the premises without incident. He time-stamped it. 13:41. He read it aloud to one of the gunnery sergeants, so there would be a witness to the writing of it, and the gunny nodded, and Brantley underlined the word restricted with a small, hard stroke. "That's how you do it," he said. "You don't argue with them. You document them." The gunnery sergeant nodded, but the nod was a half-beat slow. The nod of a man who has begun to wonder whether he wants his name in a story he did not start. He drifted back toward the coffee. Brantley did not notice. Brantley had found, in the green notebook, the one thing his afternoon had been missing, a permanent record that made him the reasonable one and her the incident. And once a man has written himself into the right side of a page, he will burn a great deal to keep from being wrong. Then he keyed the handheld radio and called the installation's roving patrol. He wanted her trespassed, formally, off the property, on paper, by a vehicle with a light bar, so that whatever she was telling the sergeant major would die out here in the cold where it belonged. He gave the patrol the location and the description. Dark coat, gray light, sitting in a chair in the lot like she owned it, and he leaned in the doorway to watch the authority he had summoned come rolling in. The patrol truck turned into the lot 4 minutes later. A young corporal climbed out, MP Brassard on his arm, and crossed to the woman with the mild wariness of a man told there was a problem and finding only a woman in a chair. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step over to the curb for me." "Understood." She stood, unhurried, hands coming naturally into view, open, empty, held a little away from her body where he could see them without having to ask. "No trouble." She moved to the curb the way a person moves, who has been stopped by far more dangerous men in far more dangerous places, and has learned that stillness and open hands cost nothing and buy everything. Her weight stayed even. Her breathing stayed slow. Whatever storm water ran under the surface of her, none of it reached the top. The young MP relaxed a notch without knowing he had, because the body reads calm the way it reads a fire, from across a room, before the mind catches up. "Can I ask what this is about, Corporal?" she said. Mild. Not a challenge. A question a reasonable person asks. "Report of an unauthorized person at a restricted event, ma'am." He said it like a line he had been handed, because it was. "I just need to see some identification, and we'll sort it out." Of course. She did not reach for anything yet. She kept her hands where he could see them, and waited for him to be ready. And that small courtesy, the not reaching, the letting him run his own procedure at his own pace, did more to settle him than any words could have. He had rolled up on a threat, and found a professional, and some animal part of him had already begun to suspect he was on the wrong side of the paperwork. Boone came out of the glass door fast. He did not run. Sergeant Majors do not run. But he covered the ground between the building and the patrol truck with a speed that made the young MP straighten, and he put himself gently into the space between the corporal and the woman before a single form got filled out. "Give me 5 minutes, Corporal," Boone said. Low, even, before anybody writes anything they can't unwrite. 5 minutes. Stand by your vehicle." The corporal looked at the sergeant major's face and did the arithmetic that every junior enlisted Marine can do in his sleep. He stood by his vehicle. The patrol truck idled at the curb with its light bar dark, waiting, exhaust smoking in the cold, while the sergeant major pulled a phone from his pocket and made a call he should have made an hour ago. Boone worked the problem the way 29 years had taught him to work a problem, which was to stop guessing and start confirming. He walked to the far end of the lot, out of earshot, and called a man he had served with in a country neither of them named out loud anymore. He described the woman, the coat, the stillness, the way she had corrected the flagfold to 13 across 4 feet of air without touching it, the way she had known the aircraft, the mishap class, the fact that Ashford had been under a bird he was never tasked to be under. The voice on the other end went quiet for a moment, a long moment, the kind of quiet that is itself an answer. "Say the scar again," the voice said. "Where?" "Both palms. Same place. Wide. Like a line took the skin off." A line did. Another silence. "Nathaniel, if she folded it to 13 and told you to your face, then you already know who she is. There's exactly one woman it could be, and if it's her, then the worst thing that has happened at that funeral today is that somebody made her wait in a parking lot. Square it away before your general gets there. Right now. And Nathaniel, you render honors correct. You hear me? You do it by the book. She earned every letter of the book." Boone put the phone in his pocket and walked back. The woman had finally drunk some of the coffee, and as she raised the cup, he saw her hands, and he stopped guessing entirely. Across both palms, pale against the cold reddened skin, ran a scar. Not a cut. A burn. The wide, seared, rope-laid burn of something dragged fast and hard through closed fists, the kind of mark a line leaves when it takes a heavy load, and does not care about the hands holding it. It crossed both palms in the same place. Whatever had made it had been carried a long way. She caught him looking. She did not hide the hands. She did not explain them either. Her eyes moved once, corner of the lot to corner of the lot, the parked cars, the tree line, the 2 exits, the patrol truck, the glass door. One smooth, uninterrupted sweep that took in everything and settled on nothing, and then came back to him. It was not nervousness. It was the opposite of nervousness. It was a habit laid down so deep it no longer asked permission. The map-making of a person who had walked into too many rooms she might have to walk back out of under fire. Boone had seen that sweep before. He had done it himself once, for years. You did not lose it. You just stopped needing it, and it stayed anyway, like a scar. He turned to Lund, who was hovering again near the door. "Find the honors detail. Have them formed and ready early." Full detail." He kept his voice down. "And Lund, you say nothing to Staff Sergeant Brantley. Not a word. Understand me?" "Aye, Sergeant Major." "Some people wear their whole record on their chest. The most dangerous ones leave it at home, in a drawer, and walk into your building as no one at all. If you cannot leave this one until you know exactly who she is, subscribe and stay close. That door is about to open." Boone looked at 2 scarred palms wrapped around a cold paper cup and understood, with a slow, cold weight in his chest, that he had spent the last hour keeping a Medal of Honor waiting in a parking lot. 7 years earlier, and 8,000 miles away, none of this had a name yet either. 2019. A compound in a valley the maps rendered in shades of brown at the gray hour before a day gets hot. Major Corinne Vance was 40 years old, and she was already moving toward the collapsed structure before the dust of the blast had settled, because the arithmetic had already run in her head and it only ran one way. A young Marine was down in the caved doorway, Private First Class Miles Ashford. 19 years old, a ground support kit attached for the lift, in a place he was never meant to be on foot, because even then, at 19, he could not stand back and let other people do the hard part. A beam had come down across his legs. The structure was still coming apart above him. The nearest safe ground was 800 meters of open wadi, and the far ridge was awake now, and rounds were beginning to walk in across the dirt. He was 19. He weighed 190 pounds with his kit. She did the arithmetic once and never again. She got a line under his arms and across her own palms, and she pulled. There was no vehicle that could reach him. There was no clever solution. There was a woman and a rope and 800 meters and 40 minutes of it, and the line biting deeper into her closed fists with every meter until the skin gave and the burn set in, and she kept pulling anyway, because the alternative was to set him down, and she was not going to set him down. He was conscious for part of it. That was the part she never told anyone. He was conscious enough to be afraid and to talk, and somewhere around the 300-meter mark, with rounds walking the dirt on both sides and his own blood going cold in the wadi, the 19-year-old had looked up at the woman dragging him and tried to order her to leave him. "Set me down, ma'am," he'd said. "I'm slowing you. Set me down." "You don't give me orders, Private." She had not slowed. She had not looked down. She had counted meters under her breath, the way she counted everything, and she had said the only thing there was to say. "You're not heavy. Save your air." He had weighed 190 pounds, and he had been the heaviest thing she ever carried, and she had told him he wasn't heavy, because that was the lie you were allowed, the one that got a boy home. And it had gotten him home. 40 minutes and 2 ruined hands, and it had gotten him home, and he had grown up, and stayed in, and become a man who could not stand back and watch other people do the hard part, because a woman had once refused to set him down, and it had rearranged what he thought a person was supposed to be. Sergeant Rafael Ibarra held the withdrawal. He was 26. He put himself and his weapon between the ridge and the 2 people crossing the open ground, and he bought them the meters one at a time, and when the arithmetic came for him, he did not run it. He already knew the answer, and he stayed anyway. He did not come out of that valley. Corinne Vance carried a 19-year-old to the extraction, with her hands laid open to the bone, and she carried the name of the man who made it possible for the rest of her life. She would spend the years afterward being thanked for the one she saved by people who never once learned the name of the one she didn't. 2021, they put the pale blue ribbon around her neck in a room full of cameras, and they read a citation, and they retired the call sign Lodestar from open traffic, because a name that famous stops being useful in the field. She stood very still through all of it. She had learned to stand still through anything. They read the words, "Conspicuous gallantry," at the risk of her life, above and beyond the call of duty. The words were true, and the words were nothing, because the words did not have a 19-year-old's voice in them saying, "Set me down," and they did not have Rafael Ibarra in them at all. Not really, not the way he deserved. She had stood at the podium and thought about how a nation gives you its highest thing for the one you saved, and has no ceremony at all for the one you lost, and how the medal in the box would always, every single day, weigh exactly as much as the name that was not on it. She wore it once, to the funeral of the man who held the withdrawal. After that, it lived in a drawer, and she went back to work, and the Marine Corps learned to salute a woman most of it would never recognize on sight, which was the strange arithmetic of the highest honor, that it made you known to everyone and visible to no one. The medal went into a drawer, the scar stayed in her hands, and the boy she had carried grew up and stayed in, and 7 years later walked under an aircraft he was never tasked to be under, the way he always had, one time too many. None of the people 40 feet away, through the glass, knew a single word of it. They saw a woman in a coat. They saw a name that was not on a list. Brantley crossed the last line himself, and he did it in the open, in front of witnesses, which was the only mercy the afternoon had left to offer him. Word had reached the doorway that a general was inbound, Ashford's old battalion commander, coming to stand at the wake, and Brantley decided the problem in the parking lot had to be gone before any brass turned in off the road. A clean doorway, a controlled room, no loose woman in a chair for a 2-star to ask about. He came out through the glass with his shoulders set and his voice already climbing. "I don't know what you told the sergeant major," he said, crossing the lot, "but you're going to be a memory before that staff car turns in. This is done. Let's go." She rose from the chair. She said nothing. I said, "Let's go." And Brantley reached out and closed his hand around her upper arm to turn her toward the road. She let him. That was the thing Lund would remember, and the young MP would remember, and Boone would remember. That she let him. She did not pull away. She did not knock the hand off, though every line of her said she could have done it before his fingers finished closing. She stood with her hand still in view, and let a staff sergeant lay a grip on a colonel's arm in front of every witness the cold lot could hold. And she gave him the whole of the mistake, freely, the way you give a man enough rope when he has asked for it by name. Then she turned her head and looked at him, fully, for the first time. And she'd smiled. It was a small smile, and it was calm, and it was the most frightening thing on that whole gray afternoon, because it was the smile of a person who has already seen how a thing ends and is simply waiting for everyone else to arrive. "You should take your hand off me, Staff Sergeant," she said, quiet, almost kind. "For your sake, not mine." At the mouth of the parking lot, a dark sedan with a red plate and 2 white stars turned in off the road. Boone, 30 feet away, stopped walking. Lund stopped breathing. And Staff Sergeant Wade Brantley's hand was still closed around a colonel's arm at the exact moment the general's car crossed the curb, and only 3 people in that lot yet understood that the funeral had just changed hands. Boone did not shout. He did the other thing, the thing that carries further than shouting ever could. He turned on his heel, walked back through the glass door into the reception hall, and brought the honor guard to attention. "Detail." His voice filled the room and stopped every conversation in it. "Atten. Shun." 6 Marines came up as one, heels cracking together, and the sound of it went through the building like a current. Brantley heard it out in the lot, and his head came around. The mourners at the windows turned. Boone faced the detail toward the glass, toward the gray light and the parked cars, and the woman standing beside a folding chair, and he marched them out. They came through the doors in step and halted in a line at the edge of the lot, and the whole reception spilled to the windows to watch, because something was happening that the afternoon had not scripted. The mourners pressed to the glass. The two gunnery sergeants who had laughed at the sign-in table came to the windows and stopped laughing. Lund stood at the edge of it all, with his heart going like a drum, because he had been told to have the detail ready early, and he had not known why. And now he was beginning to know why. Boone squared himself to the woman in the plain dark coat, and he brought his hand up in a salute. Not to the two-star climbing out of the sedan, not to any officer inside. To her. First. The way it is done, the way it has always been done, the way every Marine learns it and few ever get to render it, that the recipient of the Medal of Honor is saluted first, by everyone, regardless of rank, general or private, always. His hand came to the brim and held there, and behind him the 6 Marines of the detail brought their hands up too, and held. Colonel Vance. Boone's voice did not shake, though something behind it did. The honor guard renders honors to the medal, ma'am, as we always will. The staff car door was open. Major General Harlan Cade had 1 foot on the pavement, and he stopped there, half out of the car, and he saw the line of saluting Marines, and he saw who they were saluting. And 57 years old, and a 2-star general. He came to attention beside his own vehicle and brought his own hand up. "That's Colonel Corinne Vance," Cade said, loud, flat, for the whole lot to hear. "She carried Miles Ashford 40 minutes out of a place the rest of us barely walked out of on our own 2 feet. She wears the Medal of Honor. A beat. Every Marine here salutes her first. Everyone. I don't care what's on your collar. I don't care if you outrank the room. You render honors to that ribbon before you draw your next breath, because there is nothing higher in this corps to render them to." He held his own salute. A major general, 57 years old, holding a salute to a woman in a parking lot in a plain wool coat, and holding it, until the whole lot understood that they were not watching a courtesy. They were watching the single highest thing the profession of arms knew how to do, rendered to the single highest thing it knew how to honor, in a parking lot, in the cold, an hour late. And Staff Sergeant Wade Brantley's face began to come apart. It went through the stages in order, the way a structure goes when the load finds the flaw. Confusion first, a frown, a not understanding, the clipboard logic still trying to run. Then disbelief, the small headshake, the no, that's not. Then recognition, the horror arriving from the feet up as the last 2 hours rearranged themselves in his memory into their true shape. The grief tourist, the notebook entry, the trespass call, the hand, his hand, still remembered on her sleeve. He let go of her arm as if it had turned to fire. The list! His voice came out cracked and small in the cold. There was no name. Ma'am, there was no name on the list. There was never going to be. She looked at him without heat, without triumph, with something almost like mercy. That was the point of coming as no one. You just weren't supposed to be the one who found out what no one was. Around her, in the gray wind, a parking lot full of Marines held the salute, and the only man not saluting was the one still feeling the ghost of a colonel's sleeve against his palm. After that, it moved fast, and it moved clean, the way these things move once the truth is finally in the room. Cade did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He walked to Brantley across the frozen pavement with the whole lot watching, and he relieved him of the access detail on the spot. "You spent a Marine's funeral deciding who was worthy of it," Cade said. "You turned people into the cold all afternoon so the room would look the way you wanted it to look. I've already heard about the others." He let that land. "You're relieved. Step away from that door and wait for me inside. We are going to have a very long conversation, and after that other people are going to have longer ones with you." Because there were others. Boone's quiet record and the turned-back memorial card in the colonel's hand told the rest of it. The falsified manifest. The guests turned away through the afternoon. An old friend of Ashford's mother sent off. A former squad mate told he wasn't on the list. A man had taken a doorway and a clipboard and made himself the judge of a dead Marine's mourners, and now every name he had crossed out was going to be counted. There had been a woman, earlier, gray-haired, who had known Miles when he was a boy, turned away. There had been a man in a wheelchair, a corpsman, who had served beside him, turned away, because his name was written a little differently on the list than on his identification. Small cruelties, each one, and together the shape of a man who had never once in the whole afternoon asked himself whether the door was his to guard or the grief his to ration. Brantley walked back inside with the whole lot's eyes on his back. He would not be arrested that day. His was the smaller, more human failure of a man who mistook a doorway for authority and cruelty for standards. But he would answer for it on paper and in person for a long time, and he would never work an access point again. And for the rest of his career, whenever a list was put in his hands, he would feel the ghost of a colonel's sleeve against his palm, and he would think twice, and that, more than any reprimand, was the sentence he actually served. Corinne Vance let all of it happen without a word. Then she turned to the young Marine near the door, the one who had brought her a chair, the one whose hands had shaken. "Lance Corporal Lund. Ma'am, walk me in." A pause, and the smallest warmth moved under the words. He'd have liked that it was one of the young ones. He was one of the young ones, the day I met him. Never really stopped. If this is the moment you needed today, leave a comment with the name Miles Ashford, so it gets said one more time by one more person, and subscribe to Honor Tales. These are the stories the world keeps forgetting to tell. Lund walked her in. He was 20 years old, and he carried himself the whole way like he was escorting something that could not be replaced, because he was. Inside, she crossed to the table draped in black, to the photograph of a corporal who had grinned at a camera in a better year, and she knelt. The room had gone quiet around her. The Marines who had spent the afternoon in low clusters now stood still and watched a colonel kneel at a corporal's picture, and not one of them so much as shifted his weight, because they understood they were being permitted to see something that was not theirs. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached to her own coat, to an inside pocket, and took out a small ribbon bar, pale blue, 5 white stars, the thing that had waited in a drawer for years, and she laid it on the table beside his picture. She let it rest there for one breath, just one, long enough for it to have been beside him once. "You were never heavy," she said, so quietly that only the photograph could have heard it. "I'd have carried you twice as far. You know that. You always knew that." A pause. "I'm sorry it wasn't me under the bird this time. It should have been me. It was always supposed to be me first." Then she picked it back up and closed her scarred hand around it, and she pressed her open palm flat against the frame, over the glass, over the grinning boy. She had carried him once, 40 minutes, with her hands laid open. She had come to carry him one more time, the only way that was left to her. She stood. She thanked Boone with 2 words, and a look that held a great deal more than 2 words. And she walked out through the doors she had been thrown through, past a folding chair, into the gray light. Her phone lit as she reached her car, a number she had watched be listed as killed years ago in a country she did not name, a message, a coded greeting only 2 living people knew, and an image she would know anywhere, a battered lighter engraved with a running jackal, and the name of a place across a far ocean. Lodestar, jackal still lit. Djibouti, come get your knife back. She looked at it for a long moment in the cold. She did not smile, and she did not frown. She got into her car, and set the ribbon bar carefully on the seat beside her, and drove away from one grave with a dead man's name, lighting up her phone from the direction of another. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.